Hello and welcome to the Usage Report podcast. I am your host, Josh Shepardson, and you can follow me on Twitter where I post as @bchad50. A lot of playing time situations to break down, so let's jump right into the action. In week 2, it was a very forgettable week for running back Jeremy Hill, a popular first-round pick in fantasy leagues and a big source of auction dollar spending in auction leagues as well. He played just 19 snaps, carried the ball 10 times for 39 yards, was targeted once, and was sent to the bench and watched from the bench for the final 22 minutes of the game as a result of fumbling twice. Gio Bernard came in and played 46 snaps, and unfortunately for Hill, he was excellent. He carried the ball 20 times, totaled 123 yards rushing, and hauled in 3 receptions. Bernard's explosion onto the scene could turn this into a nightmarish RBBC situation. Nobody likes the running back by committees, but Bernard, this is what we expected last year, was Bernard to complement Hill very well and for the work to be split. But Hill finished the season great and went into this year looking like the feature back with Bernard as the change of pace back, but we might be back to where we started last year. Obviously, it's not time to cash out on Jeremy Hill yet. He's too talented for that. He's going to get the goal line work as the bigger back, and there's no indication that he's been supplanted as the starter yet, but this certainly does hurt his value a bit, and Bernard's value is up without question. That's not the only backfield worth looking at in Ohio. Cleveland Browns split their work almost 50-50 between Duke Johnson and Isaiah Crowell in week 2. Johnson played 26 snaps to Crowell's 24. Johnson carried the ball 12 times to Crowell's 15, but Crowell was the far more effective back with 72 yards compared to 43 for Duke Johnson. Johnson topped the backfield in snap counts in week 1, but he finished second to Crowell. I'm sorry. Crowell led the backfield in touches in week 1, flip-flop with Duke Johnson in week 2. This really looks like a 50-50 split, with the hotter hand probably getting a few more carries per week. Johnson was fairly good. I mean, 43 yards on 12 carries doesn't result in a great yards per carry total, but he was very good after contact. So that's certainly promising for him continuing to get some work, but this doesn't look like a very profitable fantasy situation. Both have some flex appeal in 12-team leagues. Both should be rostered in 12-team leagues with moderate size benches or larger, but neither looks like a true feature back at this point. It looks like they're very happy splitting up work, something they did last year with Crowell, Terrence West, and Ben Tate early in the season, and ultimately just Crowell and West down the stretch. So Mike Pettin, no stranger to committee back situations. Looks like that's what we've got there in Cleveland still. Week 1 darling, Amir Abdullah, totaled just 7 touches in Sunday's contest for the Lions, 6 carries for an unexciting 9 yards and 1 reception. This is kind of what we expected. Was big week 1. And result owners having a little bit more wishful thinking for his stock this year, but the rookie running back is going to have some ups and downs this year. Theo Riddick actually led the backs in snaps this week with 34 compared to Abdullah's 19. Abdullah led the field in carries with 6 and yards. With neither of those totals is exciting. Bell's the big back. You expect him to get some. He totaled 4 carries for just 2 yards. Also 2 targets. With the pass catching back, he ended up with 6 targets for 5 and 5 for right now. I can't endorse starting any of these backs. Abdullah has plenty of upside, and he obviously warrants owning in 12-team leagues or larger. To your bench status is even a tenuous at this point. Hasn't done much in. Right now, he's right at the end of the bench. Yet in 12, unless you've got a very shallow bench, in which case, but Lions offense did not look good this weekend. Matthew Stafford knocked around. Question as to whether he's going to play. He says that he to go this week, but he's been getting knocked around, and any injury to him would hurt the value of all offensive members because Dan Orlovsky's a terrible quarterback, going to move the ball the way that even Stafford, when he's not going good, can. The next situation we're going to land on, Deion Lewis is the man in that backfield for now. There was some concern from the fantasy community, and understood basically siphon all of or most of the work. That was not the case this week. 73 snaps, more than 10 times as many as LeGarrette Blount. Blount just played 7. Total 2 carries for 4 yards, carries for 40 yards in the passing game. The short passing game, he did run some wheel routes where he looked sharp. Kids used their short, 6 receptions on 8 targets. Lewis, he looks like, earned the trust of Bill Belichick. Of course, we know how quickly that flips. And from game to game, there's always going to be that risk that values the opponent as a good opportunity to get an area. A big back like Blount some weeks is going to get more usage than Lewis. Bell don't care about your fantasy teams, and no problem with using backs as he sees fit according to a game plan. And this week, Lewis was the man that totaled a lot of snaps. He's certainly worth rostering in all leagues. He's a flex option in PPR leagues right now and a strong bench option in 12-team standard scoring leagues as well. Giants, meanwhile, basically followed the protocol of no back received double-digit carries. Rashad just with 12 yards this week. Andre Williams led the backfield in rush 3, but he only carried the ball 6 times and snaps. Shane Vereen actually played more snaps combined with 10. He only carried the ball 6 times, not really a test in the passing game, and he reeled in all. Right now, he looks like the best back in that Giants backfield, but the fact that he's not going to get short yardage work, that's going to go to most likely Andre Williams, maybe Rashad Jennings. Basically, Vereen is a PPR, has PPR value, but not much more than a bench scoring leagues or a half point per reception leagues. Backfield's a bit of not one with a true viable starter in standard formats. Next up is the San Diego Chargers. And Melvin Gordon shined in week 2. He carried the ball 16 times for 88 yards, also reeled in a reception. He received fewer snaps than Danny Woodhead, playing 29 to Woodhead's 32. Gordon's upside is immense. Now's the time to inquire about his services. He's coming off of a good, not going to get him for next to nothing, and most likely his capital in him, since rookie running backs do have some appeal, and a guy who has potential every down back upside, certainly something on draft day. The fact that more snaps right now might make Gordon slightly affordable, and the upside is just huge. At worst, he'll be the primary ball carrier. He's going to get some receptions in the past. He'll be back 2 almost every week, regardless of matchup. The problem is if Woodhead stays healthy, he's going to retain a role on this offense. He is the safety blanket for Phil Rivers. Past, he's been an integral. I figure at some point it's going to take an injury for Gordon to really reach his ceiling. But Woodhead, smaller back, missed most of last season. The fact that he has stayed healthy does mean that you can't label him an injury prone back, but with smaller backs like him, I do have some that punishment of consistent. I would kick the tires on Melvin Gordon at this point. In Tampa Bay, if you were buying into Doug Martin, having a big bounce back season might be effective. 21 carries for 78 yards, but we don't have game situation to blame for. The last week, the Buccaneers fell behind early, got blown out by the Titans, and Charles Sims got significant work in week 1. But he got significant work again this week with the Bucs winning and never really in a catch-up mode like they were last week. Martin played 39 snaps. Sims still played 27. The one silver lining here is that Martin did receive 21, and Martin did also receive 2 targets and 2 receptions to Sims' 3 targets and 3 receptions. So Martin is clearly still the lead field, but it does appear that Lovie Smith wants to keep Charles Sims in this, and looks like not quite a 50-50 split, but we could be looking at a 60-40 snap count split for the force. Going to need Martin to do just a little bit more than that if he wants to emerge as the true feature back and fend off Charles Sims. One thing that I will say can clearly identify is that Sims has surpassed Bobby Rainey as the primary backup. Not saying that you should be handcuffing Doug Martin with Charles Sims. Handcuffing a mediocre back. That's reserved for situations like Jamal Charles and Niall Davis. But if an injury were to bite Doug Martin in the rear end, Sims would clearly be the back to own in that backfield. They do have a potentially profitable situation this week for fantasy owners as the Panthers rumbled for 172 yards on 33 carries, but they were less yards on 10 carries against the Week 3 opponent for the Buccaneers, the Texans. So, Martin's still a starter right now, but do be aware of Sims getting continued snap counts in another week where trailing big. The final running back situation we're going to look at is that of the one. Wow is the word that comes to mind when watching Matthew Jones. He rumbled for 123 yards on 19 carries. 37 times between the two is for both value here down the stretch. They definitely felt very comfortable leaning on the running game, and I would imagine that they will continue to do so as they can. Kirk Cousins certainly not a upper tier quarterback, and if you can away this week, but let's not just write off Morris. Was very good in week 1. He's going to continue to carry the ball quite. Expect him to continue to have the explosive leagues, and that includes shallow leagues at this point. He's more than a handcuff. He has potential for ability here going forward. If he's got 20 to 30 snaps a game, I wouldn't expect him to continue to get this kind of work every week, but he's definitely on the rise. It's down just a tiny bit, but he's still comfortably in the upper tier of RB2s since he's going to continue to get work in this offense. Moving to wide receivers and tight ends, let's start with, and I mean, I'm not going to toot my own horn, but this is a Julio Jones show. We knew that, but White totaled just 1 target and 1 reception for 12 yards this weekend. Leonard Hankerson was the sneaky performer this week with 10 targets, 6 receptions, 77 yards, and a touchdown. And he did generate some buzz in the preseason, reunited with Kyle Shanahan in Atlanta. He's familiar with this, and the Falcons have produced viable wide receiver number 3s before. Harry Douglas was good when he got a chance to get some significant run and some targets. And I think Hankerson has a higher ceiling than that. He's a burner. He can stretch the field, post these type of weeks every week. But with Tevin Coleman down with broken ribs right now, can air it out just a bit more, keeping possibly 3 receivers viable. Again, I'm this year. I think Hankerson's worth a bench spot in 12 larger where benches. You can leave Hankerson on the wire for right now. He's not going to be consistent enough to, at least at the moment, to warrant that bench spot. But obviously, the deeper the leagues you're in, the thinner the wire is. And Leonard has some upside, and I think he's a guy that might slip through the cracks just a little bit with some other big performances this week. Got a huge performance from Travis Benjamin this week, and the big play threat receiver caught 2 touchdown passes, totaled 115 yards, but he had just 3 receptions and 4 targets. He did also reach the end zone by punt return, but problem with Benjamin is he's reliant on the big play, and that's going to keep him from being viable most weeks. He can stand in as a bye week fill-in with the Saints. Stick him in during a bye week. Hope he catches one of those long receptions for a touchdown. But it's got to be feast or famine with him. And with touchdowns in consecutive weeks, 3 this week, 1 by punt return, 2 by the air, and 1 receiving touchdown in week 1, you have to figure that defenses are probably going to key in a little bit more on him, which hurts his consistency from week to week. Nobody else in this passing game is even worth rostering at this point. Andrew Hawkins led the way in snaps, tied for the league team lead in targets and receptions, but quarterback situation still not desirable at this point. Johnny Manziel acquitted himself well this week, but they just don't air it out enough to create any viable starting options. Benjamin, like I said, worth a bench spot, a guy that you can plug in during bye weeks and hope for some big plays, and a worthwhile DFS option in GPPs if the matchup's right. We're going to head back to Green Bay this week. It's a situation that I highlighted last week in the target and the usage report, and it's one that I'm going to look at again this week. James Jones did what James Jones does. Played a lot of snaps again this week. This week pretty much epitomizes his Packers career. 2 targets, just 29 yards, but his 1 reception. But that 1 reception was in the end zone. When things are going good for Jones, he's finding the end zone, but he's a huge boom or bust candidate since he is so touchdown reliant. Randall Cobb has distanced himself from the field, which isn't shocking. We knew he was the top receiver there, and by a wide margin. He had 10 targets, 8 receptions, and 116 yards receiving against the Seahawks this week. Davante Adams missed some time with injury during the game, but was able to finish the game. There is some question about his availability this week. We're going to have to wait and see what the practice reports and the injury report look like later in the week. But even when he was out there, had an uninspiring performance of 5 targets, 5 receptions, and 33 yards receiving. And he might be on the verge of getting Wally pipped by 3rd-round pick Ty Montgomery. Montgomery played just 25 snaps, but he was targeted 4 times in those 25 snaps, hauled in all 4 receptions, had 37 yards. I mean, less than 10 yards per reception is nothing to write home about, but he did best ahead of him by 4 yards receiving on 1 fewer reception. And if the rookie is able to get some extended run this week, whether that's because Adams is maybe limited or is held out of this contest, obviously we'll know more later in the week. Montgomery's going to have a chance to step in and possibly create a nightmare situation for those that reached on Davante Adams after the news of Jordy Nelson going down for the season. But anytime you can get any receivers associated with Aaron Rodgers and that passing attack, if they have a significant role, you're going to want to roster them. I would say if you're in a league that's larger than 12 teams or a 12-team league that has a deep bench, I would grab Montgomery now. He's not among the top waiver claims of the guys that I've highlighted in today's podcast, but if he gets in there and he has a big game this week, the fantasy community is going to take note, and he's going to cost a more significant portion of your fab dollars or a higher waiver priority to claim if he does go off this week. So I would go ahead if you have a low waiver claim, or you want to throw a couple bucks on him in Fab. I have no problem with doing that, getting on the injury situation shakes out, because emerges as a key piece of this offense this week. We know that the Packers don't mind running 3 wide receiver sets quite often. This game, as the article on fantasy, there were 3 receivers that totaled more than 55 snaps this week, so they do go 3 wide quite often. And as I said with James Jones, he's touchdown reliant, so there's some room for emergence for another receiver between the 20s. The other should run on my statement that this guy looks like a tight end. He only had 3 receptions, was targeted 4 times, 23 yards, nothing to write home about. But he had a touchdown. And if he's going to be, he's a big target, and if he's going to have so many talented tight ends that you can comfortably roster. Rodgers not worth keeping on your bench right now. Like Gronk, you don't want to. You own a bench spot on a second tight end that's never going to see the light of the day. Rodgers is a great guy to target during your bye week for owners of the elite, and it's possible if he turns into a true that he could end up on the end of benches as a rotation guy with some of these fringe starting tight ends in 12 teams. Next up is the Miami Dolphins, and shocking situation here. It's not shocking to see Jarvis Landry leading the way in snaps. Shocking to see Rashard Matthews once again finishing second on the team in snaps, targets, receptions, and leading the way in receiving yards this week. Kenny Stills, Greg J. Parker were all added to the roster this offseason through basically every means possible to add talent. Jennings was added as a free agent. Stills was traded for, and Devontae Parker was drafted. But it was Matthews, the returning receiver for the Dolphins, who turned in a nice performance with 6 receptions for 115 yards. It's his second good week in a row, and it seems like he's got pretty decent chemistry with Ryan Tannehill. The club appears to be easing Devontae Parker along. He played just 1 snap in week 1, up to that 17 this week, but he was only targeted 1 time and totaled 1 reception for 3 yards. Greg Jennings was a non-factor, playing 36 snaps, receiving 3 targets, and doing nothing with those 3 targets. And then Kenny Stills, 2 receptions on 2 targets for 8 yards on 36 snaps played. Home run threat with the Saints, but we haven't seen that yet with the Dolphins. So Matthews, another guy who is worth a grab, especially with the Dolphins airing it out as much as they have. They've attempted 78 passes compared to 34 rush attempts through 2 weeks. Part of that is obviously the Dolphins falling behind in consecutive weeks, but their willingness to let Ryan Tannehill air the ball out bodes well for more than 1 receiver emerging as being useful for the Dolphins. And it looks like Matthews is the guy to have now. You could comfortably, if you had Greg Jennings, I'm not sure why you did, comfortably cut him. Kenny Stills hasn't shown enough to be worth rostering in anything but the deepest of leagues at this point. I'm not ready to give up on Devontae Parker just yet, though. We knew that he missed most of the preseason, and probably should have expected him to have some rust to shake off. So give him a little bit longer if you do have room on your bench for a potential emerging playmaker down the stretch. But if you don't, if you've got shallow benches, it is fine to swap him out for Rashard Matthews at this point. Minnesota Vikings, Charles Johnson was a popular breakout candidate in fantasy circles and just has not done it yet. He did lead the way in snaps again this week for receivers, but with 3 receptions on 3 targets for 10 yards, it's getting pretty ugly pretty fast for him. The leash is definitely shortened for him, but if you're in a 12-team league or larger with sizable benches, I'm not ready to cut bait just yet. The team really hasn't had to rely on Teddy Bridgewater airing it out much. He only attempted 18 passes this week. He's up to 50 for the year. They leaned heavily on Adrian Peterson, which I would expect them to do most weeks. But if you see teams starting to load up the box again and treating these like the Vikings of pre-Teddy Bridgewater years, the Ponder years, and some other ugly seasons, I would expect Bridgewater to do a little bit more throwing to keep defenses honest. He hasn't looked like the guy who was a monster down the stretch. He did have a very efficient week this week, but I do think that you're going to see some defenses that do force them to throw it a little bit more. Johnson leads the team in snaps still, and he did have a strong finish as the #1 wide receiver there last year. So I'm not quite ready to cut bait on him if you can keep him on your roster. Ditto on Mike Wallace, who played 55 snaps this week, 3 receptions for 38 yards. Not a big performance, but if you're in a league that Wallace was rostered in coming out of drafts anyways, most likely he still has the type of upside to warrant a roster spot. Neither are startable right now. The only startable member of the pass-catching core for the Vikings is Kyle Rudolph. He's your typical – he's actually your classic tight end of touchdown or bust. He's not a freakish athlete. 5 receptions for 30 yards and a touch this week. That's basically what you're hoping for from Rudolph. Not going to be a big yardage guy, but his touchdown threat, his red zone abilities keep him in that starting fringe, the back end of the starting tight ends in 12-team leagues. The final situation we're going to look at is that of the New England Patriots. They aired it out a whopping 59 times against the division rival Bills in Week 2. There's no change at the top who the top 2 pass catchers and target hogs are, and those are Julian Edelman and Rob Gronkowski. Edelman, PPR machine. Gronkowski, the best tight end in the game. Nothing surprising here. Edelman caught 2 touchdown passes this week on 11 receptions, 19 targets, 97 yards. He's obviously not available on waiver wires. There's nothing changing his stock. If anything, it might be up slightly at this point. Gronk is Gronk. He likely required a first-round pick to acquire his services. He's going nowhere in fantasy leagues. But the guy that prompted me including him in this week's article is Aaron Dobson. He played 70 snaps this week and received 8 targets, hauled in 7 receptions on those 8 targets, and totaled 87 yards receiving. The Marshall product has basically been quiet through his first 2 years in the league. This is his second most productive receiving game as a member of the as a professional, basically. And he was non-existent last year. Non-existent most of his rookie season with the occasional flash of talent, but an athletic receiver who can stretch the field a little bit. I'm not ready to run out to the wire and grab him, but he's worth putting on watch lists. And if he continues to see significant playing time, he'll be worth adding. But at this point, I just don't know if he's going to get that. Deion Lewis is a viable pass-catching back. Edelman and Gronk are going to get significant work. Even Scott Chandler is going to get some work in 2 tight end sets. But Dobson, keep an eye on him this week. Don't rush out to grab him. I think some people will get very excited about Dobson. I'm not one of them, but I get it. Tom Brady's a fantastic quarterback, and he raises the ship for all parties in that passing game. So I will say monitor Aaron Dobson. If he turns in another solid week, at that point, it'll be worth grabbing him. The price will go up, but I would rather run out, comparatively, I'd rather run out and grab Ty Montgomery. It's easier to see him getting significant looks and targets, and I'd rather on Montgomery than jumping the gun on Dobson. And with that, that's going to wrap things up. Check out all the great content at fantasyfootballcafe.com.